Pilot refuses to let black woman board. He's grounded by the airline's CEO. They say the truth emerges in moments of unexpected tension. Imagine standing at an airport gate, excitement simmering as you await a long overdue trip. Suddenly, you witness a scene so stark, so laced with prejudice, it leaves your heart pounding. A respected pilot uniform, crisp posture, rigid glares at a kind-eyed black woman, cruelly declaring, "No room for your kind." The disbelief of passengers around them crackles in the air. What follows is a firestorm of outrage, hidden motives, and a final reckoning that shakes one of the world's biggest airlines, American Airlines, to its core. This is the story they never thought you'd hear. James Whitaker, 45 years old, a decorated pilot with over 2 decades of experience, awoke early that morning in his plush Dallas apartment. He had flown countless flights for American Airlines, proud of his near-spotless record. In many ways, James was a standard example of old-school aviation culture: firm handshake, direct eye contact, unwavering confidence in his abilities. But beneath the polished facade lurked a prejudice he'd never fully confronted. In his view, courtesy and politeness were virtues. Unless someone's appearance or background poked at his private biases, he showered quickly, steam fogging the oversized glass panels in his bathroom. Behind him, a row of accolades hung in shining frames. Best Pilot of the Quarter, 2016 Safe Skies Award, 2018 a carefully composed photograph with a 4-star general from his days in the Air Force. He dressed in his impeccable uniform, adjusting the golden epaulets on his shoulders. In the mirror, he caught his own reflection, streaks of silver in his neatly combed hair, faint lines at the corners of his eyes. He grimaced, remembering the old adage, "Pilots age faster than planes." But that morning, what consumed him most was a certain tension in his chest. He could not name a sense of disquiet, as though something ominous awaited. About 15 miles away, Victoria Roberts was similarly preparing for the day. A middle-aged black woman with a warm smile that had carried her through countless storms. Victoria was heading to a conference in San Francisco. She was a public policy researcher deeply involved in community welfare projects, focusing on issues like affordable housing and racial equity. Her main objective: speak to a panel of philanthropists and city administrators about national disparities in education funding. She'd flown many times, but each trip still carried a flutter of nerves. Air travel made her uneasy. Yet, she believed in the importance of her mission. She carefully placed her neatly bound research documents into her carry-on, checking and rechecking that everything was in order. Outside, the Texas sun was rising, the horizon stretching in vibrant orange. Little did she know that her flight that day would become an incident that would shake an entire airline and open old wounds she thought long scarred over. Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport buzzed with its usual hurry of luggage wheels and urgent announcements. Travelers scurried to their gates, each with a personal story to tell. For James, the airport's hustle and bustle was just part of a typical workday. The tower's radio chatter, the ground crew's hurried signals, and the gentle hum of the engines formed a familiar soundtrack. His flight plan, an afternoon departure to San Francisco, Flight A1279. He was supposed to ferry hundreds of passengers, many connecting onward, some heading home, some on business, others on journeys to begin new chapters. Victoria arrived early, an old habit, ensuring she could manage security checks without stress. She had printed her boarding pass at home, an itinerary that spelled out Dallas to San Francisco. She wore a comfortable yet professional outfit, a tailored navy blazer, neatly pressed slacks, a small golden pin in the shape of a dove on her lapel, symbolizing her commitment to peace and social equity. Her heart thumped with cautious optimism. The conference was a significant platform, and she was determined to make every minute count. As she checked in her bag, a polite agent recognized her name from somewhere, perhaps from one of her local advocacy campaigns. They exchanged a small pleasantry. That simple gesture gave her a sense of reassurance. Meanwhile, James strode through the staff corridors that led to the cockpit. His first officer, Daniel Cho, an energetic Korean-American pilot in his early 30s, was already reviewing the flight plan. Their partnership was amicable but distant. James kept personal relationships at arm's length, preferring to focus on procedure. Daniel, in contrast, was friendly and open-minded, always quick with a joke. On that day, though, he detected an edge in James's manner. The older pilot barely smiled and responded in clipped tones. As the two men walked to Gate 21, James caught sight of a line forming at the gate. He saw young families, business travelers, college students on holiday, even a group of musicians lugging guitar cases. His gaze then landed on Victoria, standing near a row of seats. Her eyes were fixed on her phone, but he noticed the well-worn copy of Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson peeking from her carry-on. A flicker of distaste crossed his mind. It happened so fast he wasn't even sure where it came from. James quickened his pace, refusing to examine the feeling. At that moment, a gate agent waved him over, and he set aside the passing thought until it came roaring back later, with irreparable consequences. Unbeknownst to James and Victoria, a new ripple of complication was already forming. About 15 minutes before boarding was set to close, an older gentleman, Michael Reynolds, arrived breathless at the gate. A retired Navy veteran, Michael had trouble walking long distances due to an old injury. By the time he reached Gate 21, he was panting heavily. The gate agent, stalling on final calls, scrambled to see if there was still an available seat or if they would need to put Michael on standby. Inside the cockpit, James was reviewing final details when he received a message from the gate about a late arrival. The flight was fully booked, with only a couple of seats left in business class, usually reserved for last-minute frequent flyers or upgrades. The gate agent wanted his discretion. In an uncharacteristic moment, James, rather than letting the gate handle it, insisted on taking a look at the roster himself. He scrolled through the passenger list on the small cockpit tablet. He noticed Victoria's name on the manifest, Victoria Roberts, seat 27B. Something about the memory of her face, or perhaps the intangible prejudice swirling in his chest, made him linger on that name. Daniel, noticing James's extended pause, quietly asked, "Is everything okay, Captain?" James nodded, but his eyes didn't leave the passenger list. Finally, he authorized the late passenger's inclusion, rearranging seats so that Michael Reynolds would take 27B, effectively bumping Victoria from her assigned seat. The system automatically rebooked her to 32E, a middle seat near the back. While that might seem like a minor shift, it triggered a complicated chain of events. Victoria, as soon as she saw her seat changed on the display, politely approached the gate agent. She explained that she had paid for an early check-in to secure a decent seat for her flight, as she needed space for her research materials. But the gate agent, flustered by last-minute changes, told her there was nothing else available. She offered Victoria a meal voucher to compensate for her inconvenience. Tension fluttered in Victoria's stomach, but she swallowed her frustration. She had bigger things to worry about, like the conference waiting for her on the other side of the flight. She thanked the agent and prepared to board with everyone else. In many stories of conflict, the crucial moment happens in the unlikeliest of places. For James, that moment materialized right at the aircraft door. As passengers lined up to step inside, he stood at the cockpit entrance, exchanging nods with flight attendants, ignoring or barely acknowledging passenger after passenger. Protocol demanded that the pilot greet passengers whenever possible, projecting a friendly face of the airline. Victoria waited her turn, and when she finally approached the aircraft door, she offered a gentle smile. She intended to greet the pilot and thank him, in a small way, for being part of this crucial flight. Yet the moment James looked at her, he felt an old, insidious bias well up, something that made him want to assert authority. A voice in his head whispered, "She doesn't belong here. She's trouble. She's going to cause a scene about her seat." Before Victoria could say a word, James said in a clipped tone, "MAAM, the flight is full. You might need to take a later one." Startled, she blinked. She began. "I have a boarding pass. I was assigned 27B, but the agent just told me it's changed to 32E. She even held up her phone to show the digital boarding pass. James stared at it as though it offended him. Then he repeated, "The flight's full. I'm not sure there's room for your kind of request." At first, Victoria wasn't entirely sure she'd heard him right. The words sounded forced, hostile. Flight attendants nearby exchanged puzzled looks. A hush fell upon the few passengers still waiting to board. One of them, a young man with a smartphone in hand, reflexively started recording. Something about the tension in the air told him this moment might escalate, and it did. "Sir, have to be on this flight. My conference." Victoria tried to maintain a calm tone, but it wavered with confusion. James cut her off, his voice rising. "Listen, I'm the captain, and we are over capacity for baggage. You should wait for the next plane or talk to the desk agent." Then, with an almost sneer, he added, "There's no room for your kind of situation today." A stunned silence followed. Victoria felt a lump in her throat. Over the years, she'd faced microaggressions and sometimes outright bigotry, but never from the pilot of a major airline, and never so blatantly. She noticed the flight attendants' eyes flicker with alarm, some stepping forward. The tension exploded when James spoke louder. "Security, escort this passenger away if she can't comply." That was the final straw for many onlookers. A murmur of protest rose from nearby passengers. One woman exclaimed, "What's going on? She has a ticket!" Another man shouted, "Is this some kind of joke?" Victoria's cheeks burned. She felt a swirl of shame, rage, and helplessness. She took a slow breath and quietly said, "Captain, I'm not looking for trouble. I have the right to board. I paid for my ticket, I checked in, and I need to get to this conference. Please, let me on the plane." She looked around for a flight attendant to intervene. James refused to relent, but his justification was flimsy. "We have rules, Miss Roberts. I don't have time to deal with your complaints about seat assignments." The idea that she was complaining when she'd only asked for clarification irked her deeply. But it was his tone, the undercurrent of prejudice, that shattered any illusion of professionalism. That's when he said, loud enough for every open ear to hear, "No room for her kind on my flight." It happened in mere seconds. The line of passengers froze in shock, the onlooking flight attendants turned pale, and the hush was replaced by the hum of people whispering, capturing video, texting friends, or tweeting. The entire fiasco blazed across social media platforms within minutes. Twitter feeds began lighting up with hashtags like #PilotDiscrimination, #GroundThisPilot, and #FlyingWhileBlack. A local reporter, waiting in the airport for a different story, rushed to the scene. Victoria stood frozen, feeling the weight of the phone cameras trained on her, the echo of that hateful phrase burning in her ears. She wanted desperately to compose herself. She was a professional, a calm woman, but the humiliation cut deep. No room for her kind. Tears threatened to well up. She mustered her voice, addressing the flight attendants. "Could someone please explain what's happening? I have a valid ticket." A senior flight attendant, Jennifer Harlow, who had flown with James before, stepped in front of Victoria in an attempt to contain the situation. She gently placed a hand on Victoria's arm and whispered, "I'm so sorry. Let me get the lead agent from the gate." But before she could move, James barked, "Jennifer, do not undermine my authority. This passenger is not boarding, that's final." At that exact moment, the gate agent arrived, wide-eyed at the commotion. She recognized Victoria and tried to clarify that Miss Roberts indeed had a valid ticket, albeit relocated to a different seat. While the agent spoke, passengers behind them joined in the chorus, condemning the pilot's behavior. Michael Reynolds, the late-arriving passenger, stepped forward and offered to surrender his seat. He said, "I've got the time to wait, and I don't want to see injustice done." But James, his pride stung by the growing revolt, refused to back down. Victoria realized this was turning into a spectacle bigger than she'd ever anticipated. She felt a pang of guilt for the other passengers who just wanted to take off, but the words had been spoken. The line had been crossed. She stood her ground, refusing to walk away quietly. In that moment, she became the face of every person who'd ever been told they didn't belong because of prejudice. And because multiple cameras were rolling, the entire internet was about to become a witness, too. Airport security arrived in response to James's call. Two uniformed officers, both looking uncertain, approached the crowd. They'd been told there was an unruly passenger attempting to board without proper credentials. But upon arriving, they found a calm, dignified woman holding a legitimate boarding pass. Confronted by an irate pilot, the security officers hesitated. They quietly asked the gate agent for clarification, and the agent confirmed that Miss Roberts was a valid passenger. James, however, insisted that he had final say on who boarded his aircraft, invoking an airline rule that a pilot could remove a passenger for any reason if he believed flight safety was compromised. He demanded that the officers escort Victoria away. Tension soared. One officer tried to reason with him. "Captain, do you have specific concerns about her behavior?" James, red in the face, replied, "I do not need to explain it to you. She is not flying with us." He refused to meet the guard's eyes when the man pressed for more details. In a heartbreaking moment, the security officers turned to Victoria. They had an unfortunate choice: defy the pilot or carry out an order and de-escalate the crowd. With murmurs of apologies, they took her by the arm, gently but firmly leading her away from the gate area. Passengers gasped, shouted protests, demanded the pilot be held accountable. Some stepped aside to let her pass, others kept filming. One woman sobbed openly, unable to believe she was witnessing such blatant discrimination in 2025. Victoria held her head high, tears brimming in her eyes. She clutched her carry-on against her chest as if it were a shield. She felt the weight of disappointment for everyone watching, especially young black travelers who might be traumatized by this display. As the security officers walked her away, she heard the last echo of James's voice. "Don't cause a disturbance in my airport." The humiliation was like a crushing wave. One of the most remarkable turns came seconds after Victoria was removed. Passengers, outraged and empowered by the injustice, reacted in a dramatic display of solidarity. Nearly half of the travelers waiting to board decided they would not fly under James's command. Some returned to the gate agent, demanding refunds or asking for rebooking on a different flight. Others staged a brief sit-in near the gate, refusing to move until they could speak to an airline representative of higher authority. Jennifer Harlow, the senior flight attendant, approached James with unguarded emotion and said, "Captain, with all due respect, I cannot continue on this flight in good conscience." She removed her wings pin, the small, iconic badge flight attendants wear, and placed it in his hand. The stunning gesture took James aback. He stammered, "Jennifer, we have to keep this flight on schedule. You can't just walk out." But she held his gaze. "I refuse to stand by this. I'm sorry." Within minutes, Other crew members shared similar sentiments. At least 2 more attendants claimed they felt uneasy flying under James's leadership after what they'd witnessed. A meltdown in operations was imminent. People's phones buzzed with updates from social media. The airport staff scrambled, trying to figure out how to handle the exodus. Amid the chaos, the flight was put on indefinite delay. Eventually, higher-ups at American Airlines would have to intervene. Meanwhile, Victoria found herself in a quiet room near the security office, a place typically used to question unruly passengers. One of the officers, evidently sympathetic, offered her a seat and asked if she wanted water or anything else. She took the cup with trembling hands, her heart beating fast. The shock of what had transpired weighed on her. The humiliation, the disbelief, the anger. She rummaged through her carry-on to ensure her research materials hadn't been damaged or lost. A photograph of her late mother slipped out, a smiling portrait of a woman who had raised Victoria to be strong, to keep pushing forward even when the world insisted on shutting doors. Looking at that picture, Victoria felt a surge of determination. She thought about her hometown in Mississippi, about the days spent listening to her grandmother's stories of the civil rights movement, the marches, the struggles, the incremental victories. How many times had her ancestors been told there was no room for them? This was bigger than one flight. The security personnel who had brought her in stepped away momentarily to speak with their supervisor. Victoria could see through the glass door that a group of onlookers had gathered. Some recognized her from the gate fiasco. She heard her phone buzz repeatedly with texts and social media notifications. Unsure what else to do, she put the phone to silent mode. She needed a moment to breathe. While Victoria collected herself in that back room, local media outlets seized the story. A junior reporter from the Dallas Morning News posted a short video clip on Twitter, capturing James's vile outburst. No room for her kind. The video went viral in under an hour, amassing tens of thousands of retweets. Cable news channels sent correspondents to Dallas-Fort Worth International to interview passengers from the ill-fated flight. The hashtags continued to trend nationally, drawing condemnation from activists, celebrities, and even politicians. American Airlines' PR department scrambled to contain the crisis, issuing a generic statement that they would investigate the matter. However, that did little to quell the growing outrage. People demanded immediate action against James. His name leaked within the hour. Online sleuths dug up old social media posts of his with questionable remarks about keeping order on flights. Even some co-workers began sharing accounts of James's past microaggressions. For Victoria, the sudden spotlight felt surreal. She had only wanted to get to San Francisco for a policy conference, not become the center of a national conversation on racism in the skies. But there was no turning back the clock. Word reached her that protests were forming at the airline's main offices. A representative from the NAACP attempted to contact her, offering legal advice. Activist groups vowed to hold American Airlines accountable, noting that this wasn't the first time allegations of discrimination had been made against major carriers. Miles away in a downtown Dallas skyscraper, American Airlines CEO Harriet Linden, a sharp-minded executive known for her no-nonsense approach, sat down to watch the viral video. Her face hardened with each hateful word. She pressed a button on her phone, calling her chief of operations. "I want a thorough investigation and a conference call with Captain Whitaker immediately," she said, her voice tight with anger. Harriet was relatively new in the position, having inherited an airline tarnished by several recent controversies regarding passenger mistreatment. She had vowed transparency and a renewed commitment to equality. By the time Harriet's senior staff convened in a boardroom with wide windows overlooking the Dallas skyline, the fiasco had reached a boiling point. Phone lines were jammed with complaint calls. Major news networks ran the story on repeat, and the internal staff chat was ablaze with employees disowning James's actions. Harriet looked around the table at her anxious executives. "We need to handle this decisively," she declared. "If we wait until next week for standard procedure, we'll lose public trust. This pilot must be grounded immediately." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The legal department voiced concerns about due process, union regulations, and potential lawsuits. Harriet slammed her hand on the table. "He can have his due process," she said, "but as of now, he will not fly another one of our planes until this is resolved." She rubbed her temples, anger and frustration plain on her face. "And find that passenger, Miss Roberts. We owe her an apology that goes beyond a press release." While Harriet's directives raced through the corporate channels, James had already returned to the pilot's lounge after the flight was officially cancelled due to crew unavailability. He slumped in a leather chair, trying to block out the storm of phone notifications. He was certain that the airline would close ranks around him. After all, he was a decorated pilot with decades of service, but a gnawing sense of unease crawled through his gut. A steward from the lounge approached him, quietly. "Captain Whitaker, there's a phone call for you." James rose, adjusting his uniform jacket with forced composure, and picked up the landline. On the other end was one of Harriet Linden's aides. The voice was curt, offering no sympathy or small talk. "Captain Whitaker, this is a directive from American Airlines upper management. You are grounded until further notice. You will not operate any flights or wear the uniform while an internal investigation proceeds." James felt as if the floor had dropped beneath him. "Wait, there must be a misunderstanding," he began, but the aide cut him off. "You can discuss that with our investigation team. Pack your things and leave the airport premises." A click, and the line went dead. He stared at the receiver, incensed, humiliated. The irony of that emotion was lost on him. An hour ago, he had humiliated Victoria. Now, the tables had turned. But in the swirl of his stubborn pride, James convinced himself he was the victim of a hysterical overreaction. He resolved not to go down without a fight. Despite the chaos, a silver lining emerged. After Victoria left the security office, still dazed by the ordeal, she was ushered to a quiet administrative wing of the airport, where a few sympathetic staff tried to comfort her. It was there she met Jennifer Harlow again, the flight attendant, who had refused to fly under James's command. Jennifer, who had changed into plain clothes, offered an apology on behalf of the staff. She'd seen it all unfold and was determined to do what was right. "He's grounded, you know," Jennifer told Victoria. "The CEO's office just made it official." Victoria's eyes widened with a mix of relief and lingering sadness. Jennifer gently took Victoria's hand. "I want you to know, we're not all like that. Most of us just want to make sure everyone is safe and comfortable. This was never about the airline's true values, it's about one man's twisted prejudice." Tears glistened in Victoria's eyes, but she managed a small smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." Moments later, Harriet Linden herself strode in, her posture brisk, her expression one of grave concern. She looked younger in person than her official photos, mid-40s, sharp grey suit, an air of authority tempered by empathy. "Miss Roberts," Harriet began, extending her hand. Victoria hesitated for a second, then accepted the handshake. "I'm Harriet Linden, the CEO of American Airlines. I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for what happened." The next few minutes were filled with Harriet's heartfelt apologies, her promise that the airline would cover any expenses, rebook Victoria on the next flight in first class, and launch a swift inquiry. Victoria, emotionally drained, could only nod. "I just wanted to go to a conference," she said softly. Harriet's eyes flickered with sympathy. "And you still will," she said, "on us. In fact, we'd like to ensure your seat is guaranteed on the next flight out." Victoria exhaled, feeling the tension begin to release. But the real question lingered: would the world see this as a mere corporate damage control tactic, or a true step towards accountability? Harriet had her work cut out for her. Victoria, too, felt a burden, wondering if she should just accept the rebooking and move on, or remain part of the conversation that was now raging across the country. Meanwhile, as social media and reporters dug deeper into James's history, they uncovered a pattern of complaints against him. A retired flight attendant came forward anonymously with a story. James had once used racist language over drinks at an off-duty gathering in Seattle. A co-pilot posted on a private forum that James had once complained about too many foreigners in the cockpit. None of these incidents had ever led to formal disciplinary action until now. The airline's new leadership discovered these old complaints buried within HR files, uninvestigated or quietly shelved due to his otherwise stellar flight record. Daniel Cho, the first officer on James's flight, also found himself in the spotlight. Reporters wanted his statement. Airline management scheduled an interview. Torn between loyalty to a chain of command that demanded unity and his own conscience, Daniel spent a sleepless night. The next morning, he decided to tell the truth. In a written statement, he confirmed that James had singled out passengers of color in the past, making unprofessional remarks in private. While Daniel had never witnessed such an outburst mid-flight, he admitted that James's disdainful attitude towards non-white passengers had been an open secret among certain crew members. This revelation rocked the airline's internal structure. How had someone with multiple red flags managed to keep flying? Harriet demanded an immediate audit of HR practices, furious that the culture of silence had allowed James to remain unchecked. Meanwhile, the public's call for James's dismissal intensified. Petitions circulated online, garnering tens of thousands of signatures within hours, demanding that American Airlines remove him permanently from service. The ripple effect of the incident manifested in new ways each day. Civic groups in Dallas organized demonstrations in support of Victoria and all passengers who experienced discrimination. The protesters held signs reading, "Flying is a right, not a privilege, and no room for racism in our skies." Local churches and community centers sent letters of encouragement to Victoria's organization. High-profile activists reached out, offering to support her in a possible lawsuit. Victoria watched these events unfold with a mix of awe and trepidation. She understood that the movement wasn't just about her, it was a backlash against every story of flying while black, driving while black, and the myriad forms of racial profiling that people of color endure daily. She found herself at the intersection of a national debate, her phone incessantly ringing with interview requests and speaking opportunities. But she was first and foremost a policy researcher. She reminded herself that her calling was to illuminate social issues, not to be a politician or celebrity. Nevertheless, she couldn't ignore the significance of this moment. One evening, she attended a small gathering at a local community center. People hugged her, some cried while recounting their own tales of humiliation or intimidation in public spaces. An elderly woman patted Victoria's hand, whispering, "God bless you for standing your ground, child." In that moment, Victoria realized the entire country was watching. The least she could do was stand firm and ensure this conversation led to real change, not just fleeting outrage. While Victoria gained supporters, James found himself increasingly isolated. Even his longtime friends within the pilots' union struggled to defend him. He was summoned to the union office to discuss his case, where a board of colleagues, some of whom he'd known for years, now looked at him with barely contained contempt. He tried to offer half-hearted justifications, claiming Victoria had been causing a disturbance, or that he had reason to believe she was unruly. But the viral videos contradicted every word of his narrative. One of the union reps, a pilot named Barbara Morse, glared at him. "James, we have camera footage, and you said, 'No room for her kind.' There's no possible spin to make that acceptable." James seethed, feeling cornered. "I've served this airline for over 20 years. I was in the Air Force. We're supposed to stick together." Barbara shook her head, exasperated. "Not when you bring disgrace to the wings we wear. We can't fight this battle for you, especially when you're so clearly in the wrong." The union board explained that, pending the investigation's outcome, he might face termination or even lose his pilot's license if found guilty of violating anti-discrimination laws or creating a hostile environment. James left the office with a bitter taste in his mouth, realizing that few would stand by him now. He considered making a public statement, but the airline's legal advisors had likely muzzled him, and any statement would probably inflame the situation further. Back at her modest apartment, Victoria wrestled with an invitation. A major broadcast network had asked her for an exclusive interview. She spoke to a couple of close friends and mentors about it. Some urged caution. "They'll sensationalize your story," they warned. Others thought it was an opportunity to highlight the systemic issues that needed addressing. Ultimately, Victoria recognized that she had an unprecedented platform. The interview took place in a softly lit studio, a respectful environment intended to convey the gravity of the issue. The anchor, a composed figure in a grey suit, asked Victoria to recount her experience. Her voice trembled initially as she relived the humiliation. She described the moment she heard James say, "No room for her kind," the shock, the fear, and the solidarity of other passengers who stood up for her. Then the anchor asked, "Miss Roberts, what do you hope comes from all of this?" Victoria folded her hands, exhaling. "I want to see systemic change, not just punishment for one individual. This pilot's behavior is unacceptable, but I also want airlines to examine how they handle complaints, how they train staff on inclusion. I want policies that ensure no person, regardless of their race or background, is ever denied the dignity of travel." The interview garnered millions of views across multiple platforms. People praised Victoria's composure and clarity. Donations poured into the non-profit organization she worked for, enough to fund expanded research efforts. Meanwhile, American Airlines, feeling the intensifying pressure, rushed to finalize the internal investigation. James was summoned to an internal hearing at American Airlines headquarters. Present were the HR director, Harriet Linden, a legal representative, and an impartial mediator. Several witnesses were called, including Daniel Cho and Jennifer Harlow, who recounted their perspectives on what happened. Video evidence played on a large screen, capturing James's voice echoing the hateful phrase. Each time those words reverberated through the room, James's posture stiffened. He recognized the finality of the truth on display. When it was James's turn to speak, he tried to portray the incident as a misunderstanding, claiming he'd used poor wording under stress. But Harriet refused to entertain excuses. She slammed a stack of files onto the table, records of past incidents, complaints, subtle but consistent patterns of prejudice. "Captain Whitaker," she began in a measured tone, "you have a history of biased behavior. This is not a single slip of the tongue. Our airline will not tolerate discrimination, period." His face flushed. "I've been a loyal pilot," he insisted. "I never once compromised passenger safety." Harriet narrowed her eyes. "Racism compromises passenger safety," she countered, "because it undermines trust, fosters conflict, and creates a hostile environment." The mediator cleared his throat, but Harriet continued, "The public trusts us to treat every passenger with respect. You violated that trust in the most egregious manner." In the end, the hearing concluded with James stripped of his position. The airline's legal counsel mentioned that he might face additional lawsuits, including potential legal action from Victoria or civil rights organizations. James left the boardroom humiliated, escorted by security through a back exit to avoid the press thronging the lobby. His pilot wings, once a symbol of pride, now weighed heavier than ever in his coat pocket. James retreated to his Dallas apartment, blinds drawn, the once pristine pilot uniform folded in a bag. His phone rang incessantly: friends, family, reporters. He ignored most calls, finally picking up only for his wife, who was visiting her sister in another state. She wept on the phone, worried about the backlash and the future of their family. He tried to console her, but his words rang hollow. The reality was undeniable. He was effectively fired, disgraced, and likely unemployable at any major airline. News cameras camped outside his building for a day or two, hoping for a statement. He never emerged. He spent the following weeks inundated by hateful messages from strangers, ironically receiving some support from extremist corners of the internet. That support made him feel uneasy, but pride would not allow him to publicly renounce them. He was stuck, paralyzed between denial and a creeping guilt he refused to confront. Victoria, on the other hand, took her rebooked flight first class, courtesy of American Airlines, and arrived in San Francisco 2 days after the ordeal. She missed the opening session of her conference, but still had a chance to present her research on education funding disparities. The auditorium was packed, partly because word had spread about her harrowing experience. She delivered a passionate presentation, connecting her personal story to the broader societal issues of prejudice and inequality. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Outside the conference hall, the city's skyline glowed, a testament to innovation and resilience. Victoria's phone buzzed with messages of gratitude from viewers across the nation. The airline offered a settlement, including covering all her conference expenses, a public apology in a press release, and an invitation to meet with their diversity and inclusion team to suggest policy improvements. While some in her circle urged her to accept a monetary settlement, others believed she should push for a landmark lawsuit to set a legal precedent. Victoria weighed her options carefully, guided not by revenge but by the desire to enact real, lasting reform. Weeks later, Harriet Linden invited Victoria to American Airlines headquarters to discuss potential changes in corporate policy. The meeting took place in a large conference room filled with HR officials, flight attendants, and executives. They presented a comprehensive plan, mandatory bias training for all staff, swift protocols for investigating discrimination complaints, and an anonymous whistleblower system to ensure employees could safely report misconduct. Victoria listened, occasionally asking pointed questions. Finally, Harriet thanked her. If we hadn't witnessed how our old system failed, we might never have put these changes in place. You've helped us see our flaws. The honesty in her voice was evident. Victoria nodded, hoping it was more than just corporate spin. She agreed to collaborate pro bono with the airline's new diversity team, reviewing training materials and policies. The partnership, though unusual, signaled a new era for American Airlines. It was a chance for real redemption on the airline's part, and for Victoria, it was an opportunity to expand her social equity work. She left the building that day feeling like something meaningful had been set in motion, a step towards accountability in an industry historically plagued by subtle discrimination. Just when it seemed the story had reached its natural conclusion, an unexpected twist surfaced. The FAA announced an investigation into James's conduct, citing possible violations of federal anti-discrimination regulations that govern commercial flights. If found liable, James risked losing his commercial pilot's license permanently, and the airline faced fines. However, because American Airlines had already taken corrective action by firing him and launching reforms, The FAA's main focus was on James. A month of intense legal wrangling ensued. James hired an attorney known for defending high-profile aviation professionals. The lawyer tried to paint James as a man under tremendous stress, citing flight schedule pressures, personal health issues, anything that might mitigate the seriousness of his offense. But the FAA's stance was unyielding. A pilot's seat is one of grave responsibility. If prejudice influences a pilot's decisions, public safety is compromised. In a final hearing, the FAA chose to revoke James's license indefinitely. It was a rare move, signaling to the industry that discriminatory behavior was incompatible with safe, ethical operation of aircraft. The outcome was widely publicized, serving as a stern warning to all aviation professionals. At first, James reacted with anger and denial. He found himself in a downward spiral, resentful of the world that he believed had turned on him. But over time, isolated and jobless, he started to confront the reality he'd long avoided. He sought therapy not voluntarily at first, but encouraged by his wife, who threatened to leave if he refused to address his deep-seated issues. Slowly, the therapy sessions peeled back layers of old prejudices, tracing them to his upbringing, unresolved traumas, and the insular environments he'd inhabited. Whether or not James ever truly changed in his heart, no one could say for sure, but at least for a time, he wrestled with his conscience in a way he never had before. His wife, precariously supporting him, insisted he keep away from the extremist forums that had tried to rally in his defense. She believed in a better path for them both, if he could only learn to see the error of his ways. Meanwhile, life opened up in fascinating ways for Victoria. She continued her policy work, using the spotlight to champion fair housing and educational equality across the country. Donations from well-wishers allowed her organization to expand staffing, conduct deeper research, and host community outreach programs in underserved neighborhoods. She traveled to Washington, D.C., and even testified before a congressional subcommittee on racial profiling in public accommodations. Referencing her own airline experience as a prime example, major news outlets labeled her an accidental activist, a moniker she accepted with a wry smile. Though the journey had been painful, she was proud of how the ordeal had advanced a vital conversation. And in her downtime, she visited her mother's grave in Mississippi, placing fresh flowers and whispering, "We're still fighting, Mama, but we're not alone." American Airlines, for its part, underwent a notable cultural shift under Harriet Linden's leadership. Employees attended mandatory workshops led by diversity experts, including interactive sessions where flight staff shared personal experiences of bias or prejudice they had witnessed. The airline updated its passenger Bill of Rights, ensuring clearer protocols for dealing with conflicts or complaints of discrimination. Marketing campaigns highlighted a new commitment to inclusion, featuring employees of various backgrounds, genders, and orientations, reaffirming that everyone had a place in their skies. Skeptics wondered if it was all just a corporate rebranding strategy, but internal employee surveys indicated a positive shift in morale. Flight attendants felt more empowered to report questionable behavior by pilots or colleagues. Pilots, aware of what happened to James, recognized that bigotry could no longer hide behind a uniform or a track record of technical excellence. Even after the incident receded from headlines, it left a lasting imprint on public consciousness. University professors used the case in ethics classes, analyzing how prejudice and power can intertwine to create injustice. Social media occasionally recalled the story whenever fresh allegations of discrimination surfaced at other airlines or industries. In a sense, that day in Dallas became part of a broader tapestry, woven together with countless stories of racial prejudice, bigotry, and the courageous people who confronted them. Victoria's calm fortitude and James's dramatic fall from grace were etched into the collective memory. A cautionary tale reminding everyone that prejudice, when exposed, carries grave consequences. About a year later, Victoria once again found herself on an American Airlines flight, this time heading to New York for a speaking engagement. She carried a sense of déjà vu as she boarded the plane, recalling the nightmare of Dallas. But this flight was different from the moment she stepped aboard. The crew welcomed her warmly, a flight attendant even recognizing her and whispering, "Thank you for everything you did." Victoria found herself in a window seat, gazing out at the horizon as the plane ascended. She felt the roar of the engines vibrating through the cabin, a hum that once made her nervous. Now, it felt oddly comforting, a reminder of journeys taken, battles fought. She opened her laptop, drafting notes for her upcoming talk on bridging community gaps. The old fear still flickered in her mind, the memory of a pilot snarling, "No room for her kind." But it was overshadowed by the realization of how far things had come. There was indeed room for her, and for everyone who believed in justice and equality. Change doesn't happen overnight, nor is it linear. There were still reported incidents of discrimination in the airline industry, each met with condemnation and calls for accountability. Victoria's story served as an anchor, a reminder that bigotry could be challenged effectively when witnesses refused to be bystanders and leadership chose to do the right thing. Harriet Linden continued to champion internal reforms, occasionally calling Victoria to check on new training initiatives or community outreach events. Their unlikely partnership, born of conflict, stood as a testament to the possibility of progress. For Victoria, the work remained constant, and so did the obstacles. She continued researching and advocating, bridging the data she gathered with real stories of marginalized communities. Sometimes she reflected on her mother's unwavering faith and her grandmother's tales of marching alongside civil rights leaders. "Keep going," they always said, "keep going," and she did. In a single flight, a lifetime of prejudice collided with an unshakable resolve for justice. Victoria's courage and the collective outcry of passengers, employees, and bystanders forced one of the world's largest airlines to confront its failings head-on. A pilot lost his wings, a CEO stepped up to transform company culture, and a steadfast policy researcher found herself at the forefront of a nationwide conversation about what it truly means to have room for everyone. This story is a testament to the power of standing up together against racism and discrimination. If you found value in this narrative and believe it's a wake-up call for us all, please hit the like button, share this video with your community, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge us to be better. Help spread the message that there's always room for compassion, dignity, and respect in our skies and in our hearts.